Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 5th of July, 2020, and we have a good number of questions lined up for today, so thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for the chat. Before we got started here, it looks like we've had some good discussion already in regards to light meters. And thank you, Rory, for helping out there on that front. All right, what I want to do is let's go ahead and take a look at our agenda here and see what we've got going for today. So first of all, the intro music. Music Bed was kind enough to basically donate some music for us to use at our intro and outro. So I really appreciate their help on that front. And they've also, they're offering a 20% discount. So if you do need stock music, I found them to be pretty good. So I'll put a link down in the description below after we're done here. Second up, exciting news in the sound world this week for those that record field sound and podcasts and even music is a Zoom H8 was announced. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as we get into the session here. So look forward to that. Next up, a few weeks ago, I had mentioned in the news that Premiere Pro, the newest version, the 2020 version, has a feature to convert audio timecode, that is to say, timecode recorded to an audio input on a recorder or a camera, into metadata timecode. And indeed, I got confirmation from a number of people that actually is in Premiere Pro. However, everyone that I've talked to so far that's tried to use it has not figured out how to make it work. So if you happen to have experience with that, I'd love to hear in the chat here from you. And maybe you could just provide a pointer. I actually don't have Premiere Pro anymore. My Adobe subscription is only for Audition at this point. So definitely, if you can help out, if you've got any pointers. It looks like it's only available in the sync or create a new multicam sequence, if I understood correctly. So in any case, some thoughts there. And thank you, Vincent, for the super chat. I appreciate that. And then finally, for those that have a Rodecaster Pro and work with that, one of the requests I've gotten quite a bit over the last little while is, hey, can you teach us how to use these new processing effects that where you have all of the parameters available to? So over on the other channel, we've been posting a couple of those. One went up this morning talking about the noise gate, and then a few weeks ago we had one on the compressor, and we'll continue to do those over the coming weeks here. So look forward to those. All right, let's go ahead and just jump into the questions here. So first of all, from Clayton. So Clayton talks again about the Premiere timecode. He has not been able to get it to work, but again, if someone in the chat here has, please let us know. And then also Clayton asks, Alex Knickerbocker has a video on Isotope RX having a breath control effect. Does Audition have something comparable? No. I looked through Audition. I don't see anything that's directly comparable. I think what the breath control effect does essentially is that it's basically like an expander or noise gate, except that it works a little bit differently. I think its detection algorithm is different. Instead of just using a kind of an amplitude threshold like a typical noise gate or expander does, I think it's actually looking for certain frequencies to detect the breaths. And so it's a little bit more sophisticated than that. And unfortunately, I don't know of anything within Audition, at least stock Audition, that has anything like it. So we'll keep our eyes out for that, and maybe at some point here in the future we'll get something on that front. All right. Clayton also asked, I'm wondering if you were, and this was actually a question that he had posted last week before we had our conversation with Clark Jackman, who does some audio post work. But he asked if either of us have ever used Alex Audio Butler. And just as a background here, it automatically mixes your audio for you. It was only a Premiere thing. Now it's available for Audition and DaVinci Resolve as well. Incidentally, I did ask Clark about that, and he has not used it. He's definitely in a position where he needs to do something where he has full control. So he has not used it. I have not used it, but I have put it on my to-do list at some point. And I think it's a plugin that costs somewhere it's less than $100, I believe. Probably somewhere between $50 and $100, as I recall. But in any case, I'll take a look at that at some point, Clayton, and see what we get on there. I think the challenge is always going to be when you have something that's automatic, it will, if it's good, it will potentially work in 75% of the situations you encounter, maybe. But there are going to be situations where it won't do well. So I guess it really depends on the types of things you're doing and what all is involved in your particular mix. So that could be interesting though. Like if you have an interview, a long form interview, if it can auto mix that in terms of pulling down the open mics that are not currently being talked into, that's a pretty cool thing. And so that's what I'm most interested in seeing. All right, Alex says this new Zoom H8 recorder is out on the market. Let's talk about it. So this has been received with, I think a lot of people have joked about the way it looks, but I'm not as concerned about that. If audio gear, I don't really care that much about how it looks, but some people have thought this thing looks really funny. So in any case, this is a picture of the new Zoom H8, and presumably it's called the 8 because it has 6 XLR inputs plus 2 stereo mics on the capsule up on top. And so it gives you a little bit more inputs than the H6 did. Another thing that's interesting about it is it does have a color touch screen down here at the bottom. So that I think is an improvement over but it's potentially an improvement. We'll see when we get our hands on one, but that could potentially be an improvement depending on the situation. This is not a bag recorder. I've heard some people joking about trying to fit this into a bag. It's not a bag recorder. It's not really. I really think that this is something that fits into the consumer, maybe prosumer space, and it's really made to be kind of a tool that can adapt itself to lots of situations. So it's not a dedicated field recorder type of thing. So it's really, they threw out the idea of being able to put this in a bag, I think, if I had to guess what the designers were thinking about it. So you can see there are three XLR inputs on each side on that kind of geometric shape there. And then the touchscreen at the bottom. Interchangeable capsules, just like the rest of the Zoom H6 and H5 series. And there are actually some new capsules. So you can see here how the different XLR inputs go in there. One thing that they've done that's kind of interesting is they have created these sort of, focused UI modes. So for example, if you're doing field recording, you choose that, and then it kind of optimizes its interface for that particular purpose. Another one for music and another one for podcasting. So that actually, I think we'll see how that pans out, but that's a good idea. So here, for example, in the podcast app, another feature they've added that the H6 and the H5 and the H4n and so on and so forth did not have is you can now use different sound pads, and you can actually load your own sound effects into the recorder using an SD card. And the idea is that you can, during your podcast, you can have jingles or intro, outro music or ads or whatever it is that you need to do for your podcast already pre-programmed in there. One thing to note is that you do, for those sound effects, you use up 2 of the channels. So you then are limited to 4 input channels when you do that, just so that for people who are interested in that particular approach. Rory mentions that's an odd form factor for that many. Where would it go? Here it is. Here's Rory's. That's an odd form factor for that many inputs. It is a little bit unusual. And then Daniel talks about that geometric shape is an octagon, 8-sided. I suspect that was on purpose due to be named the H8. Okay, interesting. So its design took its cues from the shape of the that center module there. Of course, there's a music app as well, and then there's also, for the field app, they actually highlight a Foley artist here, namely Rick Owens. And so I thought that was interesting that rather than focus on dialogue recording, they focused on Foley. And I think really that actually probably makes sense because I think I think that what I've seen is that with these handy recorders, where they've been most useful for people that work in a more professional range is they're typically going to use it for sound effects recording. It has been my experience. The form factor of the Handy series just isn't that great for, all day mixing in a bag when you're doing dialogue recording, but that's the main thing I've seen there. Of course, it comes with the XYH6 microphone capsule, which I believe is the same capsule that's on top of the Zoom H6. And then, of course, they have a variety of other capsules as well. And we've seen all of these here. There's a mid-side, for example. There is the capsule that comes with the H5, which is a stereo. There's a shotgun. There's an add-on for 2 additional XLR inputs, although I don't believe that this one provides phantom power, as I recall. So it would be for microphones that don't require phantom power or perhaps line inputs. There's also a stereo shotgun mic. So an interesting option there. And then there are some new capsules. There is a new stereo capsule that can go from XY to AB type of configuration. So that's kind of an interesting thing. That makes the recorder perhaps look even funnier, but again, I think it's more about function here. And then also a VR microphone array. So a 4 microphone ambisonic recording capsule. So that looks pretty interesting as well. So the price of the Zoom H8 comes in at $399 US. I have one on pre-order, so we will be reviewing it at some point. And then this is interesting. So you can actually add an additional 4 inputs. This is a new capsule that they're adding as well. And I believe this one is not clear. Just connect a power source to the EXH capsule to supply. Okay, so you evidently need to provide an additional power source to provide phantom power to those additional 4 inputs, but at least it's possible. So that's interesting. Also, the BTA1 adapter, the Bluetooth adapter, fits into the H8 as well, so you can remotely. I'm not sure all the features that will be allowed there. It looks like you can arm and disarm tracks. You have your transport controls. I'm not clear on all the things that it's available to do. I would assume that it's not quite as rich as the app for the F-series recorders on the Zoom side, but we'll see as well. Traditionally, they've only made their apps available for iOS, and I assume that's probably the case here as well. And they do confirm here you can record, play, stop. Yeah, so it's mainly just transport, it looks like. And meters, of course. Audio interface as well, so USB. It does look like the USB connector is USB micro, for better or worse. Can record up to 96 kilohertz, 24 bits, so it does not have 32-bit float recording. I think some people were curious about that. And that's mainly it. The specs are a little bit on the lightweight side for now. Usually they put more in-depth specs, but here, for example, I didn't see anything about equivalent input noise or gain range or anything like that in the specs as of yet. Hopefully we'll see that here in the next little bit. Let's see. Yeah, so that's the main news on the Zoom H8 front. So as I say, these recorders I think have their space. I think even in professional use, they are probably going to be more for sound effects generally. But I'm looking forward to testing it and seeing what we find with it. So those are my thoughts there, Alex. Thanks for bringing that up. All right, Rory brought up something very interesting here. So for those we talked about this actually a few weeks ago, but Sound Devices 800 series, that's the Scorpio 888 and 833, had a noise assist plugin that was introduced about a month ago, or maybe a little bit more. And the idea is that you can do real-time noise reduction in your recordings, and you can do it a variety of ways. And actually here, Rory mentions it's possible to record a single mic source on 2 tracks, one with noise assist and one without. So you basically have a kind of a safety way of applying the noise reduction. So that way, if it works out, great, they can use the already noise-reduced track. If not, then they can fall back to the track that didn't have any sort of noise reduction on it. So that's cool. On the 8 series, you can do that. With the MixPre, on the other hand, and I should note here, I have not purchased the MixPre Noise Assist plugin yet, so I don't have any experience with it firsthand. Is there an equivalent, maybe using a mix track? And I think, yeah, Rory, you could certainly use a mix track to accomplish the same thing. So you get 2 instances, either to the left mix, the right mix, or any of the isolated channels. So yeah, you could use a mix track and maybe pan one of your inputs to the left mix and everything else to the right, and just denoise that left mix track. That is one way you could do it. It's not It's not nearly the same as on the 800 series, of course, but that's to be expected for, MixPre versus their Pro line. So if not, it would appear that a final decision about whether to use Noise Assist must be made before the record button is pushed, unless you add a second mic on a different channel. So yeah, I think that's going to be the limitation of the MixPre, of course. The routing just isn't as sophisticated as you would see on the 800 series, so that is going to be a limitation. Also, do you know how MixPre Noise Assist works with a stereo mic? I have not tried it, so again, as I said, I don't have the MixPre, but I haven't even tried it on the 8 series, to be honest. But if anyone else does have firsthand experience with that, love to hear about that. So, excuse me. So thanks, Roy. Good stuff there. All right, Tom W. asks, I primarily mix sound for live events. I have, over the past couple of years, put together a small kit, a Zoom F4, 2 wireless lavaliers, and a shotgun mic. For the 2 or 3 times a year, I get calls for location field recording. More likely than not, I'm called in last minute, and rental companies are not conveniently located to my area. While I enjoy gear as much as the next person, I'm not eager to purchase seldomly used equipment. I do, however, like to be prepared for the job. What might be helpful to add to my kit next? Perhaps timecode generators or Comtex. Something else I might be overlooking? Let's talk about that a little bit before we go on to the next piece here, Tom. I would do it based on what the requests are that you're getting. And I will say, in my experience with the smaller jobs, the request I typically get first is actually for some sort of wireless feed, usually headphones for a producer or the director, versus timecode. That's been my experience. So that's the thing that I would probably do first. Timecode is generally not used on those lower budget productions. They just don't generally. I mean, they can sometimes. They could. There's nothing really stopping them, but my experience has been that generally it's not. So that would probably be my first choice. Then Tom goes on to say, do you have any insight comparing the Tentacle Sync with the UltraSync 1? What's a good number to have on hand? Well, the nice thing about those is you can buy them one at a time, and so I would probably just buy one. In terms of comparing the Tentacle Sync and the UltraSync 1, they each have their pros and cons, like every situation basically. And the UltraSync 1, the big benefit of that system is that it continuously jams wirelessly, so that's really nice. You're not worrying about rejamming everything all the time. To make that work, however, you do need to have at least 2. One that acts as the main transmitter and the other one that is the receiver unit. So in that case, you would have to buy 2 of them. Tentacle Sync, on the other hand, doesn't continuously jam wirelessly, but it can rejam using an iOS app. So I guess the good and the bad of Tentacle Sync is that the app is really good. The bad is that it's iOS only. So, and also another thing that's really good about Tentacle Sync is that it comes with the best timecode app I have seen ever on the market. And the reason I say that is it makes it really easy to manage all of your Tentacle Syncs. Excuse me, some allergies here. It allows you to, again, rejam to do all the settings. So you have this nice, beautiful, large screen that's easy to work with versus the tiny little screen on the UltraSync. But again, iOS only. And then the app that you can use is Mac OS. They have a Windows version of the app, but the main purpose of the app on the computer is for bringing all of the footage and the audio clips in, and it very quickly syncs them all up. And if you recorded timecode to an audio input on an audio recorder or camera, it will convert that to metadata timecode as well. And it does it really, really well, better than DaVinci Resolve does. I don't know how it compares to Avid Media Composer and its capability of doing that conversion, but it works really, really well. So if I could only choose one, I'd probably choose Tentacle Sync, to be honest. And I think the price just went down on the Tentacle Sync as well. So anyway, there's some thoughts on those. They have their pluses and minuses. For me, the Tentacle Sync is good because I can, on my app, monitor all of the battery status on each of the timecode generators, and I can rejam them after lunch or dinner. So that makes things a little bit easier and less crazy. UltraSync 1 can do all of that as well, but I think I'm not positive, but I think, well, they're constantly jamming or rejamming, so you don't have that issue. I'm trying to remember if you have the ability to monitor the battery status of the remote receiver if you only have another UltraSync 1. I think you might have to have the base station for that. Now, if you really want to go all in, they have their Wave base station, which is fantastic, amazing, but that's more for a cart setup. And it's also has an app that runs on a Mac that works really, really beautifully. But that's a bigger investment than what you're talking about here. So I think for your situation, I'd probably go with a Tentacle Sync. But if anyone else has other thoughts on that, okay. So we got an update here that Tentacle Sync app for Android. So I could be mistaken. It looks like maybe they have an Android app now too. Good to know. So thanks for that, Film Runner. And thanks for the super chat from Rob. Thanks so much. Did I miss something? Happy belated 4th to you, my online American friends. We have some non-Americans here too. So thanks everyone for joining today. All right, back to Tom's question. So there we covered timecode and we covered additional gear. So by the way, Comtech's, these days, I wonder if IEMs from some of the other companies might be better. So I'm actually looking at some Shure in-ear monitors, wireless monitoring systems. We'll see what we come up with, but I'm going to do a little bit of investigating there. Comtechs are just the nice thing about Comtechs is they operate at a frequency that is protected, at least in the United States, and so you don't usually have to do a lot of fighting to get those things working, and they're not going to be competing with your wireless microphone systems. That's the advantage of Comtechs. Some other options coming on into the market. Deity has their BPTX, I think it's called. So that could be used as a Comtech as well. But anyway, some other options out there that we'll be looking into. All right, Stephen says, I'm beginning a documentary film project with a friend of mine who is an amateur race car driver. I'm considering trying to hide a lav mic on him as he's driving. He wears one of those flame retardant jumpsuits, and we're in Florida, so I wanted to ask if you have any suggestions about hiding a lav on a subject in a high humidity, potentially pretty wet environment. I do. In that particular case, I assume that he'll also be wearing a helmet, and I would strongly consider putting that microphone inside the helmet. I think in terms of audio response, you're going to get a better result that way. You're going to be dealing with a screaming engine. He's going to be moving a lot. If he is wearing a helmet, assuming it is a he, you didn't specifically say he or she. If you put it down on the jumpsuit somewhere, I think there's a chance it could get bumped. I think it's going to have a harder time picking up his voice or her voice if they are wearing a helmet. So I would put it up in the helmet somewhere. I think if the helmet comes down, if there's some way to put it just off to the side a little bit, somewhere in this area here, or possibly here. This might not be as comfortable for the driver. You have to, of course, make it comfortable for the driver, but over off to the side inside the helmet might work pretty nicely because that way it's not pressing against their face. It's not where the helmet is fitted against their head, and yet you're getting it up nice and close to their face. So that could be hopefully something that would work for you there. And then you also go on to say, if it helps, I have a Sennheiser G4 512P and the 112P wireless systems with the MKE2, the ME22, and a Countryman B6. I'm inclined to use my cheaper gear in this case in case it gets ruined, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Well, the nice thing about the Countryman B6 is it's so small that could make it a lot easier to get it into the helmet if there is indeed a helmet. And I hope there is in a race car. If they're wearing a fire suit, they're probably wearing a helmet as well. If you want to be careful about your gear, the ME22 would probably be okay as well. And again, this is going to be a situation where there's going to be a screaming engine. And he does wear a helmet. Okay, thanks for the clarification there. So that would be my number one choice. And so, yeah, if you want to be careful about your gear, the ME22 should do the job. It doesn't sound, as you know, I'm sure, the MKE2 and the Countryman B6, in my experience at least, generally sound better. But, if you've got this situation where things could get a little hairy, in any case, that should do the job there. So thanks for that question. It's a good one. All right, Sang says, I work on a lot of video projects at my church, mostly involved in run and gun interviews, talking head or spoken words type of stuff, both indoors and outdoors. I've been thinking about investing in a microphone. I don't have a budget to purchase multiple mics, so I want a mic that can be used in a variety of settings. I was thinking a short shotgun mic like the S-Mic 2S or the NTG5, since I shoot indoor a lot, and a longer shotgun mic isn't necessarily good for indoor settings. Would you recommend either of those mics, or is there some other mic that I could look at? So for those in the audience, definitely let us know what your thoughts are on that. And it's good for Sang to have lots of perspective. So okay, so my thought is yeah, if I had those choices, the NTG5 is nice from the standpoint that its polar pattern is more focused than the S-Mic 2S. It's also a lower noise, self-noise mic in my tests. So between those two mics at least, I like the NTG5 quite a bit better. It is, of course, the more expensive mic, but it does have a 10-year warranty, and I've had a really good experience with mine so far. So those are my thoughts on that one, Sang. I hope that's helpful. And if others have some insights on of which of those two mics or perhaps another microphone, I guess I would say if you're going to put it on the camera, the NTG5 or the S-Mic 2S make more sense. And of those two, to me, the NTG5 sounded a bit more natural and was even smaller than the S-Mic 2S in terms of weight, certainly. They're about the same length, I think. But it also, I don't know, it just seems like a more robust mic. It is an RF bias mic, so if you're in a spot where it gets pretty humid, that can be helpful as well. So that would be my choice. All right. Moving on from Kevin, the Basic Filmmaker. Congrats on the 100K awards. Sweet and well-deserved, sir. If you have time, I think newer viewers would benefit from a short explanation of balanced versus unbalanced. What's the difference? What is the effect of mixing them up? How do you tell between them, etc.? Thanks for helping YouTubers get better audio. Okay, let's talk about that. So for those watching, true or false, balanced cables sound better than unbalanced cables? And I'm going to wait for your response on that. I'm curious to see what people say here. We'll talk about it, of course, but let's get your input. While we're doing that, let me talk about the differences. So typically, to tell you have to look at the specs on your microphone. But if we're talking microphones, for example, if your microphone has a 3.5 millimeter output, typically that's going to be an unbalanced connection. If, on the other hand, your microphone has an XLR output, the 3-pin type, like you've seen here, this is generally a balanced connection. So it depends on the equipment that it's coming out of, the microphone that's coming out of, and what it's going into as to whether or not it's balanced. But those are the main ways to tell the difference. I'm not seeing any comments yet. I need people to tell me here. What's your thought? Does balanced sound better than unbalanced? Higher audio quality. It's a little bit of a trick question. Yeah, it is a trick question. I think there's a little bit of latency here, so I'm going to go ahead and start talking about it a little bit. So, here we go. Here's one from Rob. False. Balance has more to do with interference, right? I would say correct. And then Daniel says he agrees with Rob. Okay. Alan actually mentioned here, so Sennheiser MKE 400 on board, a GH5 for the past 3 years. It's okay. Also Asden SGM 250. So the SGM 250, I believe, has a balanced output, and the Sennheiser MKE 400 has an unbalanced. Here's another one. Interested party says distance. And yes, that's also another factor. Less interference in balanced. Hindsight 101 says it is the same. If you are running longer cables, go balanced. Longer length run benefits from balanced. Yes. Jackie Lamb, they sound the same, but since I usually do longer runs, balanced runs have less interference and noise. So all of you are spot on. So really what it's about is generally you can get, Well, so the balanced design essentially gives you protection against interference, electromagnetic and RF interference. And so that's one of the benefits. And so if you're going to do longer cable runs, usually it's a better idea to use balanced if you can. And in fact, you can convert unbalanced to balanced by using a DI box. I don't have one here, but they don't even, in many cases, you can get, most of them are actually passive, so you don't even need any sort of power source for the DI box. It can convert an unbalanced signal to a balanced signal, and then you do your longer cable run after you've made that conversion. So it doesn't really necessarily affect, balanced versus unbalanced doesn't have a direct effect on audio quality. It does have an effect on the ability to interference immunity. So now there are additional factors as well. There are different types of balanced cables. So we have had these conversations in some cases before on XLR cabling and which type to use. I've used mostly Mogami, but I have also used some other types as well. I've used, I think it's Canary. Some people say Canary and others say Canary, but they also make some nice cabling. And what they do in those cases is they actually add some additional shielding, and the quality of the shielding is higher that goes to the ground. So there are some differences there as well. And in fact, you can get unbalanced cables that have additional shielding. For example, someone asked about that last night. I did a live stream over on the main channel, and I did purchase some shielded cable from Monoprice. It was just, a TRS 3.5 millimeter type of cable, and it's done pretty well. I haven't run into any issues. It's short. I mean, it's only maybe 1.5 meters or something like that, but so there's that as well. Lau asks, what's a DI box? Thanks for asking, Lau. A direct injection box, and essentially it's a box that converts an unbalanced signal to a balanced signal. So the idea is you'll typically see them on stages for live performances with especially acoustic musicians. They will plug their instrument's pickup into a DI box that sits up on stage, and then from there they'll run an XLR cable to the snake to the mixing board. So the idea is that way they can run that signal all the way back to the mixing board without picking up a lot of interference. So that's the main idea with a DI box. Here's another thought from Jackie. Summer cable versus Canary, Neutrik versus Chinese Neutrik. Yongsheng. Thoughts? For me, it's the quality of the physical quality mostly. I agree. I think that when you start getting into those differences, there's Neutrik versus Chinese Neutrik. I think it does. Yeah. I mean, I don't have an extensive experience. I do have some custom cables that I got several years ago from a friend of mine who did not use Neutrik connectors. Fortunately, he used some other connectors. I don't know who made them, but they've actually held up pretty well. But most of my cabling uses the Neutrik connectors. Neutrik is just a brand. And in terms of quality, they've always been very good. I've been very happy with them. And they're usually, if you're ever curious, if your cables have Neutrik connectors or some other type, Neutrik usually has their brand name on the side here. I haven't used summer cable, so I'm not familiar with that. But I have used Proco. I got some Proco cables years ago from Sweetwater Sound, and that cable actually got ruined. It actually had a Neutrik connector, and somehow it got crushed under something on a production set. It was a fine cable, though. So I guess it just depends. There are so many factors, but what I can say is you probably don't want to go on the really cheap end. Our friend Kevin, the Basic Filmmaker, bought some Amazon Basics XLR cables, and he was picking up a ton of interference. He was running them, they were all over his live stream desk, kind of routed down, and I think they crossed electrical power at some point, and they were picking up a hum. So you'll want to just be careful about that. I would stay away from the lowest end there. But if you can go, and here's another thing that we talked about last night as well that I would also advise. I've found if you just go online to buy Mogami or Canary cables, it seems like they're pretty expensive. And I have found that my local pro audio shop can make me custom cables, and by custom I mean they'll make them any length I want. They'll let me choose what type of connector exactly, and they're actually, Neutrik connectors are not just one type of connector, there are a whole bunch of different options. They'll even give me a choice about what color band I can put on here, so if I want to have, different colors for each of my cables, I can do that, which can make it a little easier to identify your cables when you are running a lot of them. But I find that they can do the same cable that I would normally order online pre-made for probably 2/3 the price, roughly. So you can save a little bit of money there if you do have a local pro audio shop. And this is not even a, it's not a sound for video or sound for film dealer. It's actually they actually mostly cater to DJs and to live sound mixer, front of house mixers and some recording studios. So that's a tip that might make sense for your particular situation. So, all right, let's go back. So Kevin, thanks for that question. Very much appreciated. Next up, this is not so much a question, but something that Rich wanted to pass on here. I'd like to pass on a bug he found with Noise Assist and the MixPre version 7 firmware. So good to know for those that are going to go buy that $300 plugin. My audio sounded terrible with Noise Assist on. It was tinny and thin, sounded like you were underwater when I tested the plugin at -6, -3, and even -2 dB. I just kept getting terrible audio on 2 different channels with 2 different microphones. For the MixPre 3.2, I'm using a custom setup. Everything's on advanced mode except for gain, which is on basic. I like the knobs to be used for gain instead of as a fader. This is the bug. When I set gain over to advanced, I recorded perfect audio with Noise Assist on all the way down to -20 dB. Please keep gain on advanced mode, not basic mode. Please pass along this since it was driving me crazy. Final note, I confirmed with Sound Devices technical support a firmware 7 update will be coming out for this bug. So Rich, thanks so much for sharing that. That can save us all a lot of time. That's very generous of you to share that, and hopefully Sound Devices is able to get that out for us here pretty quickly. All right. Looks like we have a question here from Marcelo. My situation, I direct small commercials, sometimes with a reduced team, often having to record the audio myself. Last year, I started shooting some short films. Question, I currently use a Sennheiser 416 with an old Zoom H4n, not the Pro version. I think that I'm not using the mic to its full potential. On a $700 budget, should I buy a Zoom F6 or a MixPre 3? Will I feel a big difference from the H4n? I'm going to hand that question over to you guys too. I want your input on that. And I'll share my thoughts as well. This is where different perspectives come into play. Zoom F6 versus the MixPre 3.2. I think you're going to get as many opinions as there are people out there. I will tell you my personal preference of those two. I'd probably go for the MixPre, but again, it depends on how many inputs you need. It depends on if the Zoom F6 form factor works better for you. I think I probably prefer the MixPre 3 form factor. I think the big question is, will I feel a big difference from the H4n? I don't know quite enough about the situation to know. The H4n is an interesting recorder. It's more of a consumer, maybe prosumer. So I don't know exactly what you're doing with it or how you're using it. Are you feeding audio to the camera as well? If you are, I'd probably not get the Zoom F6, or else you're going to have to buy an attenuator cable to make that work well. I feel like the MixPre 3 just has more. I think at this point in time, in terms of features, I like the MixPre 3. What you will notice a difference on with both the F6 and the MixPre 3, but especially the MixPre 3, is if you are going to use limiters, I think the limiters on the MixPre 3, to my ear, sound a little better than the Zoom F6. So that's a thought as well. And they're both superior to what you have in the Zoom H4n. So there is that. So that what that means in practical terms, if you're recording something and an actor or talent suddenly gets very loud, louder than anticipated, it will prevent the audio from clipping, potentially, probably under most circumstances. But on the H4n, that wasn't the case. The limiter in the H4n is actually, I don't even know if there is a limiter. I think they actually have a compressor. But I don't remember for sure. But it's purely implemented in the digital domain, and so it's not going to stop any sort of distortion that occurs when people suddenly get loud. So there is that option. There's the noise assist, and both of them have a mix assist or an auto mix kind of feature. So if you are doing roundtable discussions at some point too, sounds like you mostly do commercials. So I don't know if that's going to be quite as helpful for you, but I would think that the limiters would be helpful. So I guess what I'm saying in short, it's not a huge difference. I mean, I guess it depends. If you're really happy with what you're getting out of the H4n right now and you just feel like maybe the audio quality will be better, it may be a little better. The nice thing about the 416 is it has a pretty hot output signal, so it wasn't as if you have to really push those H4n preamps really hard. So you might be getting pretty good recordings already. But certainly the preamps in the Mix Pre 3 and the Zoom F6 are superior to the H4n by a lot. And so there definitely is a difference from that standpoint. But I don't know if you're going to see or hear a night and day difference. Again, I don't have what... I don't know, kind of all the particulars about your situation, but we have a lot of input here. So Norm says the 416 is a pretty loud mic, doesn't need a lot of pre, but even the H4 is a little noisy. So yeah, you may see a difference there. I have a Mix Pre 3 Series 1. I'm a one-man hobby filter. I'm seriously over-engineered for my hole with the Mix Pre 3 XLR inputs, but the most annoying on-off switch. Okay. Rowland Man says, I ditched my H4n years ago and replaced with a Tascam DR100 Mark III, which is a pro version of that form factor. Okay. Good input on that. Thank you for that, Alan. Tom says, I am also a solo shooter and chose the Mix Pre as it seemed to me to be quicker and easier to use. I agree with that. Actually, I think ergonomically it has some advantages, but there are some people that hate the touchscreen. Somebody complained to me they were working outside in a really hot outdoor kind of situation. Their fingers were all sweaty and they could not operate the touchscreen. So that's something to consider as well. Bick Raven says, I own all. Go sound devices, just better to work with. Elegant versus clunky. Okay. Patrick says H4n feels slow and old. I use it as a backup device. And he says you can go to a sound devices 633 if you can stretch to it. Egg says Mix Pre 3 or 6.2 series. Film Runner, just my opinion. I love my Mix Pre 10.2. Zoom products feel like toys to me. Now, these are all valid opinions here. Either will be better than the H series. I think that's true as well. Okay, here's interesting here. So from Jackie Lamb, did you have a chance to compare the preamp's noise performance of the Zoom F1 and F4? To me, the F1 sounds similar to the H1N, but I don't have a budget to get an F4 yet. Yeah, I think the F1 is... I think it's a little bit interesting that they branded that the F1. It doesn't seem to fit with the rest of the F series lines from my point of view. It had a very kind of mid-range focused preamp sound to it, which I didn't love. And yeah, the noise floor was definitely not in the same league as the rest of the F series recorders. So I don't remember the exact numbers. And then finally, Patrick says sound devices tend to be better. So none of them are perfect, though. Here's another thing that Alan said regarding Mix Pre Noise Assist. I also noticed a bug in its use that required a restart of the Mix Pre to fix it, and so he rebooted, and it was fixed. So F4 is a good deal now, too. I would say that. So F4 is another one to consider there. It doesn't have the 32-bit float recording, but it does have some very good preamplifiers, certainly better than your H4n. So... And then, yeah, here's another one regarding noise. If you do, yeah, Julian Krause has a great channel where he does really in-depth measurements on different microphones and recorders and things of that nature. So he has some test equipment that he can do some kind of a more scientific look and measurement of the different pieces of gear out there. Usually what I do is something more practical in nature. So I have a room that's acoustically treated that I usually go in there and measure what I call the practical noise floor. So we actually are capturing sound that's in the room and just kind of comparing where that sits. And that's kind of a measure of dynamic range of the microphone as well as its self noise and other things like that. So, all right. So hopefully that was helpful. We had a lot of input there, so I appreciate that. Thanks everyone for that. So Marcella, hopefully you found that helpful there. Camille, I have 2 Elgato key lights. So we're onto lighting here on our Sound for Video session today. Is it worth exchanging one of these for an Aperture 120D Mark II with a mini dome and a honeycomb? What worries me a bit is the fan noise. I have a small room. Does the noise have a negative influence on your sound recording? Is this option recommended? Are there any other better options? Thank you. So I would ask everyone in the audience too that has experience with these lights to chime in as well. I would be concerned, Camille, if you're working in a small room. I prefer not to use fans noise. And actually, speaking of fans, that's better. So I just turned a fan off there. There's a fan in my camera there, which turns off when you start recording. So yes, I would be concerned about a fan in a small room on the 120D Mark II in terms of sound and your microphone picking that up. So I would avoid that if you can. I guess what I don't understand, and I think I saw you join earlier, I don't understand or don't have an understanding of what the issues are you're seeing with your Elgato lights. Just for those that are not familiar, Elgato is a company that their gear is really focused on gaming streamers. So they make I think they make the Stream Deck, they make some capture cards, and they actually also have a series of lights now. Or actually probably have for a while, but I think they have a new series recently. So if you're having a specific problem with them, let's talk about that. But what I use here, for example, I have 3 lights and 5 lights. That just grew really fast, didn't it? I have 5 lights here. So the 2 main lights, this one here, which is my key light, and a light back there, which brings up the ambience in the room. Those are both D&O 180Ws. They're LED panel lights. And this one has a softbox on it to make it softer. And then that one is pointed up at the ceiling just to bring up the ambiance level. They don't have they don't have fans, and so I really like them for that reason, to use them in this kind of scenario. So there's something to consider there. The other lights, so this one here, this hair light right here, is actually hanging off of one of my acoustic bass trap clouds up on the ceiling here. That's the Lupo, what's it called? The Smart Panel, I think. So it's their newer small LED light. And then, of course, I have 2 Aperture MCs in the back there for the color accents. But Camille, I would definitely stay away from lights with fans in a small space like that. So hopefully that's helpful for you. Those are some thoughts on what you can do there. Here's an interesting one. So thanks for bringing this up. So this is from Filmer. I've never had a problem with my C120D2 fan noise, but usually I've got an overhead boom mic and it's at least 2 meters away from the talent. So that's something to take into consideration. I think in my experience, the size of the room that you're in is also a factor. I'll use my 120Ds in a larger room without any problem at all. And usually, yes, mine are about 2 meters away once you put the softbox on in particular, even for the key light. So not usually a big problem there. But if you're in a small room, that's where it becomes a little bit more of a problem in my experience, because you're generally closer to the light, especially if you're using a Light Dome Mini. So you're going to be closer to the light. That's where it can become a little bit more of a challenge there. So, all right. So that covers all of the pre-submitted questions, and I'm going to go ahead and jump here. Here's one from Stan. Any recommendations for a MixPre 10.2 TA3 to XLR cable for external monitors? Would love to learn to solder them, but will practice on regular XLR cables first. I generally, Stan, I'd get mine from one of the Sound for Film dealers or my local pro shop. They can do those as well. So the sound dealers, at least here in the US, are Gotham Sound, True Audio, Location Sound Corp, Audio Department. There are some others as well, but they're located in various places throughout the country, and you can order online from any of them. So that's where I would probably get a TA3 to XLR. And I recently learned how to solder myself. So in fact, the cable that we're running through today was soldered by me. It's actually not as hard as I thought. So I would do it outdoors if you can, unless you have some sort of a ventilation hood. But it's not too hard. It's pretty straightforward. So thanks for that there. All right, we have a few minutes left. Let's take a look and see what we have here. Earlier on, Bick Raven, you had a question about light meters. I hope you got the answers you were looking for there. I know that Rory jumped in with some Seiconic recommendations, and I would agree. Today, if I were buying a light meter, I'd look at a Seiconic. I have the Seiconic C800, which is actually not a light meter. It's a spectrometer, so it's for measuring color quality and things of that, and actually light output, but it's not really meant for exposure metering. But Seiconic makes some great things, and in fact, they're probably the main player in that domain. All right, scrolling on down. Vincent, I am so sorry to hear about your challenges. So Vincent got a new audio interface recently. Here it is. So he got a Motu Ultralight MK4 and it was defective. The warranty is going to cover it, but he's looking at an RME. Is going to go with an RME instead. I'm interested to hear that whole story sometime, Vincent, and I'm sorry for your troubles there. Here's a little more information from Rory on the Seiconic. The L758 meters were discontinued about 3 years ago, but they are available used. All right, let's see here. Oh, and Daniel James Van Delsum also uses an L758. And Ismar, thanks for joining us here today. It's good to have you here. And Vincent also kind of chimes in and says, Seiconic is wonderful, expensive, but you can count on them. All right. Here's a question from the Vedic Way. What is the best way to monitor the sound going to stream? I find it hard to use OBS as the monitor output function is always delayed, so it's hard to focus on the voice. I don't have a great answer to that, and that's why I am not wearing headphones right now. So what I have here is, yes, the exact same issue, delay. So this is actually plugged into the little confidence monitor I have just below the camera here, and that's at the end of the output stream before it goes to the computer. And the problem is if I put these on, I will get completely disoriented because there's probably a half second to 1 second latency, and I just can't keep listening. So I'll usually, that's why at the start of the stream, I don't know if you saw this, but what I'll typically do is I'll have it on at the very start just to make sure everything sounds okay and pull them off within the first few seconds just because I can't stand listening to that. Now, typically it's not as much of a problem if you have someone else producing your show, but if you're self-producing, that's where it becomes really, really problematic. And I don't have a great answer to that. What I typically do is when I'm getting set up, I will monitor closer to the source, to the preamplifier. So I'll monitor here, for example, with my Apollo. I did the monitoring there when I was getting set up. And then once I got everything else set up, I plugged into the output of the confidence monitor here at the end of the signal chain and used that as my kind of final check to make sure the audio was getting all the way through the signal chain without any problems. So wish I had a better way, but that's about all I know here. Okay, lots of talk about Hanover. Hanover I visited a few years ago. I got to go visit Sennheiser, which is based in a small town outside of Hanover called Wiedemark. I don't know, hopefully I said that right without slaughtering it. But that was just such a memorable trip. What a beautiful country. The countryside was beautiful, and visiting the company and the people there were just so accommodating and kind, and it was a really cool visit. Really enjoyed that. Daniel says the Zoom H8 looks really nice. Would love to see a Zoom F12 though. I actually concur. Excuse me. I agree 100%. That would be a lot more interesting to me as well. Rod says H8 tries to be all things to all people, indeed, and I think that's really the niche that they're filling there as a $400 product that can serve a lot of different audiences. So Zach says, I love my H6. My next recording mixer will be a Mix Pre. Lau asks whether it was inspired by the Mandelbrot set. That's a reference I don't know, but and I don't. Perhaps it was. Yes, Peter, they did. Yeah, they mentioned they'll have a plug-in capsule to add 4 XLR inputs, so a total of 10 inputs. Wow. Looks like one of the Transformer characters with 6 eyes. Oh, Riverside FM, thank you so much for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Riverside FM is a streaming service that I use, and they have been super responsive. I actually asked them to make some changes, and hopefully they can make those changes before too long. But in any case, kind of an up-and-coming streaming platform that is really, well, it's actually not really sold as a streaming platform, but it's actually a podcast recording web-based platform, and it actually records very high-quality audio. So that would be much better than, for example, a Zoom call or a Skype call. And it does that really well, but it also allows you at the same time to stream to YouTube or Facebook or whatever. And one thing I asked for was the ability to choose your microphone source separate from your monitoring source. And if they can build that feature in, that would be really awesome. So thanks, guys. I appreciate it. All right, so Rory mentions here, back to the H8, for the ambisonic crowd, a $400 recorder may be a big deal. I agree with that, and I don't know if they have announced the pricing on the ambisonic module just yet, but I'm going to guess it's going to be, I can't imagine that would be less than, or unless someone else knows that they did announce a price. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm going to guess that's got to be at least $200, but probably more than that. We'll see. Zoom definitely focuses on pricing, so we'll see. And agreed, even if it does come in at $200 or $400, even if it comes at $400, that's still less than a Sennheiser or a Rode. The Sennheiser, I think, is $1,300, $1,200 or $1,300, and the Rode is, I think, $1,000 for their ambisonic mics. So, all right. Let's see here. Moving on down. Rory mentions New York City location sound company that I use carries all the compact timecode solutions, and strongly recommends Tentacle Sync. Yeah, I don't know. Roy, do you go to Gotham Sound, or I would assume if you're in New York City, that's probably the one you're going to. Henning mentions Tentacle is soon releasing a Track E, which is both a timecode generator and a 32-bit law recorder, which sound interesting. Apparently a small form factor. Yes, they just sent out an update. They're still working on it. I was hopeful that they had originally planned to deliver by now, but I think the pandemic sort of slowed them down a little bit. So in any case. Rollin Man, MixPre only supports a single instance of noise assist, so no stereo and no dual recording of one track with, oh, okay, so I didn't realize this. So correction, and thank you, Rollin Man, for correcting me on this. In the 8 series, you get 2 instances of noise assist. It sounds like you only get 1 in the MixPre. So no stereo noise assist and no dual recording of one track with noise assist and one track without. So you cannot apply, it sounds like you cannot apply noise assist to the stereo left or right. That's a little disappointing. Okay. Thank you for correcting us there. And thank you to Alan for the super chat. One thing that Big Raven threw in, Tri-Deity WLav Pro. Good sound and water resistant. Yes, I just got those in, by the way. Finally, I got that. Let me just grab these. There was a little bit of a wait because I needed the 3-pin LEMO connector for my audio limited systems, but we do have the WLav Pro and the WLav Micro, so we'll be having a review of these here in the next few weeks. I'm excited to take a closer look at those and a listen to them as well. So, all right, I think I think we got most everything. We then went into our discussion about cabling. We talked about balanced versus unbalanced, and we talked about sound devices, mixed pre versus F6. We had a good, healthy discussion there. Let's just run to the end here as we wrap it up and see if there's anything else here that we wanted to cover just before we close it out. Leo gives his thumbs up for the tentacle. Ake also has the mixed pre 6.2 and wishes for the mixed pre 10. Quality is great. Powell says this Amazonic capsule will surely be cheaper than the H3 VR recorder, which I think is not $250. So good point. So probably $200, maybe $150 for that. Banks Naughty Bits says about the big thing as a podcaster I see with Riverside.fm is it does double-ended video recording, also in the Zencaster beta. Life is good with competition. Indeed. They have done a nice job on that. Norm talks here about F8N versus the mixed pre 10.2. It's actually 10.2, I think. You can get great sound from both. I have an F8N, but would likely get a 10T if I didn't. I think the F8N is a little easier to use in a bag. Yeah, that front knob is really helpful, Norm. I agree on the F8N. That's the one thing I'm not a big fan of on the mixed pre series. All right. Oh, and then for the question about monitoring, Rob brings up a great point, and a lot of the streaming platforms don't have this, but he says, I'd love it if I could just get YouTube level meters somewhere. And I concur. I've got meters, actually on both the monitor, the confidence monitor, I've got meters. So I know what's happening up to that point in the signal chain. I have no idea what's happening once it gets over to the streaming platform. And there's enough latency that it would be kind of hard to do that, but in any case. Another question from Rob regarding Zencaster and Riverside. Any idea how they stack up against StreamYard? Well, StreamYard doesn't have the recording capability. So if you're looking at it from a strictly streaming platform point of view, I think that StreamYard is more feature rich in terms of being able to put comments on screen or chat comments on screen and things of that nature. And dynamically, Riverside FM is still pretty new, so you don't have the ability to set up the scenes in the same way. You basically just get two 16 by 9, when I did it at least, 16 by 9 images next to each other. So it's a pretty new feature, or new service. But what they do well, I think, is they will record the isolated video channels and audio channels, and they use a very high quality codec. So you're getting really high quality audio. So that's our big advantage from my point of view. All right, Patrick, any suggestions for recording gunshots? Would you do multiple mics at different levels? I do not have a 32-bit recorder. I have a Sound Devices 633. I would go to the Sound Speeds YouTube channel. He just did a video specifically on that topic. And what he in particular did, he found that recording with the limiter and intentionally setting the gain staging so that you hit the limiter when the gun went off, that he got a more impactful kind of sound. Now, different people will have different philosophies on that. I think some people will try to capture everything and then process it in post to sound the way they want it to sound. But I would definitely check out his. I've never done gunshot recording, so I don't have any experience on that. Another resource on that as well is Watson Wu. And I don't know if he has some YouTube videos, but his channel might be worth checking out as well, specifically for shotgun or for gunshots and things. Rory says, my understanding is that one can purchase 2 instances of noise assist for the mixed pre, and I'm not sure that is the issue. In any event, if there's a problem, one can use a second mic or channel. Interesting. Okay. Interesting that you could potentially buy 2 instances. Okay, very good. Well, we're a couple minutes over. So everybody, thank you so much for joining here today. And Oh yeah, another thing here just came up here. Bang's naughty, but just pointing out, Sound Speeds is selling XLR cables he solders for a limited time, as well as a test fake mic plug. What he means by the fake mic plugs is he has a XLR connector that you can use to measure the noise performance of your preamplifiers, and it has a 150 ohm resistor between pins 2 and 3. So he's selling those as well as custom-made XLR cables. So there's another choice. Thank you for that. I forgot about. I didn't know he was doing cables. Good to know. I knew about the plugs though. Okay, and then Paul. Oh, now we got a big little, not a big little, but a bunch of new comments here that are good. The external extension capsule will have phantom power with external power supply. That is a big difference and a nice step forward. Regarding StreamYard, it does record the stream just at their streaming quality, artifacts and all. I record my audio and my co-host audio with my mixer, so my recording is good. But, yes. Yeah, I think that the audio quality you're going to get on Riverside.fm is going to be higher than or better than that. All right. I think that's going to do it. Oh, anything about the Premiere Pro linear timecode thing? Has anyone had any experience with that? Know how to get it to work? I couldn't find any documentation when I Googled it. I couldn't even see it as a new feature listed anywhere when I Googled it. So I don't know what Premiere is or what Adobe is doing with that. If you have a new feature, I think you want people to know about it. But in any case, if anyone does have a comment, if you could put that down below, and we'll definitely cover that again in the future if you do have experience using that. So, all right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us here today. Get out there and make some great sound, and we will talk to you again next week.